Okay, now it's on. Okay, so why this? This is an interesting question. Why it wasn't studied before? We actually don't know how the dimensionality of the error may affect the representation and learning. And the reason that it's not really learned is because we usually train those networks using backpropagation, which works so well. But backpropagation actually couples the forward path with the backward path. We go through the same. Is it my or your?
That's me.
Okay. Couples the backwards and the forward and the backward matrices through the same metric. So we cannot independently play with the dimensionality of the forward and the backward path. What we can do is just use previous idea that came about. It's not working. Okay. Fitment alignment idea by Lillicup et al. In 2016. And the idea is instead of using the forward matrix, the arrow can go back through a different set of matrices and then just go back from layer to layer. So we don't need to do this coupling of feed forward and forward. This makes things a little bit more brain-like. The problem is that it's worked okay, but not for all cases, and we'll talk about it soon. But also, they had to use, actually, to make it efficient, they had to use the same structure for these B matrices, as going back matrices, in order similar structure, similar size to the feed-forward matrices. What we're going to do today is take this one step further and ask, can we just use this low rank trick on the backward matrices and ask what are we gaining from that and what can we learn from that? And we use another thing that's called direct low dimensional feedback, which is maybe going a little bit more to the biology, where actually the error can come not from the just next layer, but from some efferent source through constraint areas to any layer of the network. Okay, so basically the plan for what I want to show you, we're going to start with an exact solution on linear network. There'll be some math, but it's going to be linear and relatively simple. And then I'm going to show you that this thing actually can extend to nonlinear and large network and interesting architecture like convolutional networks and transformers. And then we're going to talk about something more biologically plausible idea of that and how can we understand from that what's happening to receptive fields in the brain. Okay, so very fast, just the idea of how do we use, we're solving a linear network here. So let's introduce a simple linear problem. Here on the left, we have a linear problem. The output is just a linear transformation. A would be low rank. So some low rank transformation of the input, X is large, and we introduce some noise. And what we want to do is learn through this kind of backpropagation with low rank matrices. This metric using this solution, which is basically A, by backpropagating through a linear network. So the linear network has an input, a hidden layer, and an output, but instead of the feedback will go, or error would go through this set of laws is going to go through our constraint error. Okay, so how do we do that? I'm not going to derive all the solution, but the idea we can actually follow the entire learning dynamics by defining an arrow. The change in the weights is just the derivative of the arrow, and we can write down the whole solution. Something like Andrew Sachs et al. With Jay McClellan and Swag and Gully have done it and shown that this thing actually work. And note that although the network is linear, the learning dynamic is nonlinear. This is because the nonlinearity we came here from the error. So the dynamics can be interesting. But instead of following complete dynamics now, I just want to focus on the solution for the dynamics. So the solution of the dynamics, the final point is a fixed point of this dynamics. And this is when this thing kind of equals 0, right? So the fixed point of dynamics we get when this thing holds. And I remind you that we're looking at a low rank system this way. So the point to note here is that if the rank is smaller than the number of neurons in the layer that's bringing down the error, then the solution is underdetermined. And what does it mean? It basically means there are many solutions, but only one of them is a correct solution for the learning problem. So the learning will converge to most likely to the incorrect solution. And we can see it through here. Basically, what we're showing is the iterations and learning. And on the left, or the y-axis, we're looking at the singular values of the learned solution, W1, W2, this is a linear matrix, relative to the singular values of A. So when all of them converge to 1, we have learned the solution. And we see that if R equals M, this is the maximum rank that it can be, they all learn the solution, but when it's smaller, it doesn't learn the solution. The noise, we're unable to read. And the idea is that the low dimensional feedback is not aligned with the error. We're actually not getting back the correct error. We cannot learn well with this error. So how do we get about it? We just need to learn the correct error. So how do we learn this error? We started with something very naive and very simple. We had this low rank matrix coming down, and that we defined some loss, and the loss is let's try to mimic backpropagation in some way. So we're taking our low rank matrix and we're saying this loss, trying to equate it to the transpose of the weights, and then we can derive the change into this matrix. Note that the change is only to the P matrix, right, to the upper part. And basically, and importantly, it also does not depend on the data at all. It also does not depend on the nonlinearity. This is completely linear and does not scale with hard problems with the amount of data that we have. And when we do that, at least in the linear network, we see that it can completely solve the problem, even when we get to lower ranks. Basically, the network kind of learns where the arrow is, where the arrow lies, and then it sends that back, while the queue uses a regular feedback alignment, where the weights themselves align to the arrow, and we can solve it completely. Interestingly, this thing can be carried forward to more complex network, and the idea behind that is, again, that, as I said before, it does not depend on the data, it does not depend on the nonlinearity. So we tried it here for convolutional neural networks, something a bit more powerful. So this is CFAR, and we have a classification of those 10 classes. Here we see the backpropagation accuracy, and we see that we can significantly constrain the number of the rank to k. Here's the number of channels in each of the layer. We can take half or quarter, even 1.8 of them, and we almost get no suffering to the accuracy. We can actually learn with those in the nonlinear networks. Even more interesting, we can look at visual transformers. So visual transformers are one of those new architectures that are using. They're kind of on the same level of large convolutional networks, but they operate in a completely different way. Terry said something about transformers, not these transformers. We're talking about these transformers, and the idea is that again, it works very well with those transformers. Even this very non-linear network using learning with low rank. You can see the different rank, and you see as we get to about 64, we're talking about the networks, I think it's 512 or 1,000 long. So we're pretty much constraining the feedback, and we're still getting as much as accuracy for the and the loss. Now, the interesting that we actually gain from that is when we think about efficiency. Remember, I told you before, this is completely linear and does not scale with the size of the problem. It does not scale with the data. So apparently it becomes very efficient, this thing, when you're trying to learn it from a machine learning perspective. The computing the backwards pass through the low metrics is, of course, it's linear with a rank. So here we see the flops, the backward flop. Flop is a floating point operation. Basically, how hard is this for the computer to solve it? So we see the lower the rank as we expect, less numbers. But you may expect that if we take smaller ranks, we may need more iterations eventually to get to the same error. So how do we actually gain? Do we actually gain any efficiency in the learning? And we actually do. So here we see two things on the same plot. On the bars, you see how many flops we need to reach 90%, or basically to almost converge to the solution. And on the right, you see the accuracy that drops as the accuracy of 5 minutes. Okay, I need to run fast. And 5 minutes to talk, yeah. And then you can see that there is a regime when we're not losing accuracy, but we are significantly reducing the computational cost of this, the number of flops being used in order to compute it and to learn it. Okay, so we can train large network with constrained error. The feedback needs to learn the error space. It improves backpropagation efficiently, quite significantly, and I think it's important for a lot of applications, but this is not very brain-like so far, right? We had this loss function that we had to minimize. So we thought, how can we make it more brain-like? How can we do this learning using some local learning rule? And we just use the idea that, let's say we're now trying to learn this P matrix, but using some local learning rule. What is this actually doing? Basically, what we want P to span the major part of the error, to find where the error is and to send the correct error back down the network. And we can do that using something basically using OYA learning rule. So OYA learning rule, if no, you can set it up. It's a local learning rule that basically finds the top PCs or the top dimensions of the activity. So we can set it up so that the learning rule learns using those top PC. So what did we gain in locality? What did we lose? Now it depends on the data. So it may be in computer-wise, not in the brain, but on the computer, it won't be as efficient. But when we look at least in here, neural networks, we can see that those linear networks solve it completely using this, again, completely local learning rule. But again, we can take it to more interesting architecture. Here we're looking at convolutional neural networks, and see again the convolutional neural networks when we increase the rank, very low ranks where we achieve backpropagation level accuracy using this simple learning rule. And the other thing that I promised in the beginning, we also looked at direct error propagation. So here, excuse me for this terrible drawing, but the idea that the error comes through low rank from the top layer It can either come from the top layer or from the penultimate layer. And you can see that again, with very low rank, we can actually achieve it. So again, we can effectively train those very large networks with very small constraint error with just small ranks for low dimensionality. How can we use it? And I'll just find out with a few words about how can this be applications. This is work by Jack Lindsay with Stefan Deni and Sergen Guli, and they found something interesting that if you take a model of the visual system and you kind of constrain one of the layer, put a bottleneck, then you change the shape of the receptive field from circles around to be more oriented. And they say, okay, in mammalian, when we have this optical nerve and we have this convergence, we get this oriented fields, but in salamander, for example, when there's no convergence, there's no bottleneck, we get more circle surround fields. So the question is, is it because we have a feed-forward bottleneck or the bottleneck in the backward? So using our mechanism, we actually can control it. And so this is the feed-forward network with a bottleneck, as the way that Lindsay et al. Did. And what we did, we just replaced this with a network without bottleneck, and we only bottleneck the feed-forward. The backwards or the error. And we see that as we decrease the error or reduce constrain the error, we go from this oriented fields to the circle surrounding. So basically the error constraining is sufficient to show this observability. And the last thing we can also is it's also necessary. So we can play the other way around and we put a bottleneck in the feed forward, but using our direct feedback alignment, we kind of skip it. And then we ask what happens if we allow more information inside, and we see that we actually they disappear the second round. So the actual separate fields depend on the dimensionality of the error. So let me just summarize the take home from what we did. Low dimensional error can drive effectively credit assignment. Feedback weights need to align with the input hour space. That's basically all we need to align this P matrix, not this Q. This Q can actually stay random in many cases. Feed-forward weights align, the feed-forward weights align with feedback weights, so this Q can be random, but we have feedback alignment like we've known before. Low rank significantly improves computational cost, and this is very important for application. As you know, those things kind of eat energy, and any reduction, we got to 20-25 reduction in flops, which is going to be significant, and error dimensionality shapes in your representation. Okay, if there are any questions, that's it. Yeah.
So wondering if it's really a recursive problem. So you want to when you want to learn the errors, then you want to propagate it and then have an error of the error in which you were actually sort of having many layers of error, each one of them sort of learning the previous error layer in some sense. That would be something interesting.
You mean to do it layer by layer? So the
a similar way to have an error of the error and an error of the error.
You want to somehow learn how the error, did we have any error in learning the error? So that's a bit hard to do because then you need to know it ground truth for the error at each, and I don't know how to guess it. But it works. So fine, I'll just tell you something that we're working on now. We can implement such similar ideas to predictive coding, which has more local layer to layer. Maybe it's a bit similar to what you're kind of listening, but not exact. But we think this might be even closer a bit to might be happening in the brain. Yes.
Can you extend this for the feedback to also support inference and learning at the same time through this part?
No, so this is only for learning. In the inference is the question how this inference goes into this theory, no, but I go back to the same question here. When we're looking at predictive coding, then inference and learning actually become very similar. The way that we can replace backpropagation with predictive coding is one idea. But in this case, both the learning and the inference take the same idea of minimizing the same energy function. So in this case, we think it might be a little bit more relevant. So it will also come in the inference phase. Yeah.
So I was a little confused at how you implemented the dimensionality reduction through the Kohl's rule. Like my intuition is that Kohl's rule, the dimensionality of the learning signal that you get from that will depend on the correlation structure of the input layer and the correlation structure of the output layer. Like
it's a correlation structure of it learns the final structure of the input to OIA. In this case, the input to OIA is a reverse matrix, it's a feedback matrix. So the input to OIA is the error at the top layer. So it actually learns to separate, to do separation between those dimensions of the arrow itself. By the way.
Okay, thank you.